You go ahead and get that started. Okay. And so we're going to go ahead and start, and then maybe we'll have people join us as we go. So we are talking about disaster preparedness, specifically nutrition. So I have a couple of slides about basic disaster preparedness kits, but we're really going to spend most of the time today talking about the nutrition component. So with that being said, let's get into basic kits. So they always include, right, the first thing you think of when you think of disaster preparedness, we're talking about battery-powered radios, flashlights, extra batteries, maybe a first aid kit, maybe even a dust mask, plastic sheeting, and duct tape in case you have to shelter in place. If we didn't know this beforehand, we certainly have learned over the last few months that we should keep a supply of wipes and hand sanitizer available. You want to make sure that you are not running low on your prescription meds and your non-prescription medications. Infant formulas, diapers, wipes, extra pet food. Always have some cash or traveler's checks. Make sure that you have copies of important documents, either in a nice protected cover or electronic, stored somewhere. And then now we're going to get into food preparation. If you have a grill, maybe you stock up on some propane or some charcoal. Maybe you get some of the sternos for chafing dishes so that you can warm up food. Manual can opener. Make sure that you have a manual can opener. Somebody reminded me the other day, because I've only ever had manual can openers, that yes, indeed, there are fancy electric ones. And if the power goes out, you will be unable to open a can. So make sure that you've got a manual on hand. Next, we need, that often gets overlooked, paper plates, cups, plastic utensils, paper towels. Those are going to be important, depending on your water supply, the electricity. You're not going to be able to run the dishwasher. And so having some disposables on hand are going to be really helpful so that you have something to eat on. We also need water, and we're going to talk about that in more detail in the next slide. And of course, food, which we're going to talk a lot about. So something to keep in mind: if the power goes out, the refrigerator will keep food cold for about 4 hours if unopened. So once that power goes out, really try to limit how often you're in and out of the fridge so that you can maintain that cold temperature for as long as possible. The recommendations are that you have at least a 3-day supply of both water and food in those disaster emergency type situations. So for water, the rule of thumb is 1 gallon per person per day. Okay, and that is flexible depending on if you have kids in the home, nursing moms, sick people. We live in Florida, right? So in August, July and August and September, the temperatures are going to be really high. So you may actually need more than that, but that's a good marker. That's a good rule of thumb to try to keep at least that much for at least a 3-day supply. Okay, you have options for water. You can get the commercially bottled water, and even with that, you have lots of options. You can get the big jugs. You can get the individual 8-ounce or 16-ounce bottles. I like to keep a mixture. I like to keep a variety. So I have a couple of the big jugs, and then I have a couple of packs of the 16-ounce bottles, okay? You can also fill your own large containers or pitchers. So depending on how far in advance you do this, there are some suggestions. I use my own containers and pitchers leading up to a storm. So we live in Florida. We're talking about hurricane season. We have a lot of warning for hurricanes. So a couple of days before it's gonna be here, then I fill up a couple of big jugs or pitchers and just throw them in the fridge. And then if the power goes out, I can pull them out, right? And then I can use up that water first before I dig into my supply of bottled water. If you do it in advance, preferably plastic containers, washed, disinfected, okay? You fill them with water, you make sure they are sealed tightly, stored in a dark, cool place, and label them. Label them with a date of when you filled them, because they're not good forever, okay? You want to replace that water at least every 6 months. And also, just as an aside, don't forget to fill your tub right before a storm. If it's going to be the kind of storm where you might lose power, fill up the tub with water, because then you can use that water for things like flushing the toilet. And again, you don't have to break into your supply of bottled water for that. So let's talk about food. The first few slides we're going to go through are specifically for no power. Okay, so non-perishables in case of power loss. And then we have a slide or two at the end that deal with other scenarios. Okay, so in case of power loss, really we're talking about a lot of canned goods because they have such a long shelf life. Everything's already cooked for the most part, so you can just open the can and eat whatever is in it. So specifically canned meats, canned beans like black beans or pintos or baked beans, canned fruits and vegetables, canned soup. Okay, even if you can't warm it up, even if you don't have a sterno, you can still open up that can and eat it. Where possible, when we're doing canned items, because we're trying to make this as nutritious as possible, so whenever you can, try to get low sodium or no added salt with your vegetables and your soups and your meats. And with canned fruit, really it's better in its own juices or in water. And then if you absolutely have to, if you don't really have a choice, then you're looking at in light syrup or in the regular syrup, okay? Those canned, especially the canned soups, have a lot of sodium. None of us need that much sodium, especially in an emergency situation where we don't want to use up our whole supply of water. Other options, fully cooked pasta in packages. So I've got a picture there at the bottom of the screen of the Barilla Ready pasta. I don't work for Barilla. I'm not making any money off of advertising them, but I learned of this product fairly recently and thought it was a great idea. So they come in these packages, and you can get all different kinds of pasta, the elbow, the penne, whatever you like, and it's fully cooked. So if you've got a couple packages of that pasta in your pantry, along with some jarred spaghetti sauce, you're good to go. You have a meal. I would also keep maybe some canned juices. And there's a picture here of juice boxes, right? So sometimes they come in cans. Sometimes you can get a case of the juice boxes. The most important thing would be to try to make sure that it's 100% juice and that it's not got a ton of added sugar in it. And that can go a long way for contributing to your vitamin intake, your fluid intake, especially if you're limited on things like water and fresh fruits. Milk comes in a lot of different forms to be shelf stable these days. You can get boxed, like liquid milk, canned milk, or powdered milk. Okay, if you're not a milk drinker, or if you do a milk substitute like almond milk or soy milk, they also come in those shelf stable cartons that I have pictured on the slide. Milk, again, just like water, comes in a lot of different forms. So you can get the 32-ounce carton like I have pictured. You can also get the smaller, like 8-ounce single serve cartons or little bottles. And again, just like with the water, I keep a variety. So I have 1 or 2 of the bigger 32-ounce cartons, but I also keep a couple of packages of the 8-ounce, because let's say I want a bowl of cereal in the morning and my power is out. If I open that 32-ounce carton of milk, how am I going to keep it cold, right, if my fridge is down? So I can open up one of the 8-ounce cartons, put that in my cereal, good to go, okay? In case of power loss, again, we're talking about maybe some healthy snacks, dried fruits, raisins, cranberries, apricots, prunes, right? I just tried some dried prunes recently and they were very tasty. Mixed nuts also make a great snack. So your almonds, your pecans, walnuts, whatever you like. You can get fancy and put them together and do trail mix. Trail mix, though, you have to be careful. Trail mix comes in a lot of different forms. So we can have really healthy trail mix with fruit and nuts and seeds. And we can have not so healthy trail mix with a bunch of chocolate pieces in it. So preferably, we're getting the healthier trail mix, right? Disaster preparedness or not, I always keep some protein bars or granola bars in my pantry as a quick grab and go snack or meal replacement. And so then they really come in handy as a pantry, as a shelf stable pantry item. Cereals are just like trail mix. You can have really healthy cereals and you can have things like Captain Crunch and Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Which is my favorite, by the way, but it's not in my pantry. So some of my go-tos are things like brands like Kashi or Fiber One, Special K, Cascadian Farms. So that is not a full and complete list, but it gives you a lot of options for some healthier cereals to keep stocked, okay? Also, nut butters. So peanut butter, sunflower butter, almond butter. We've got a lot of choices these days, in nut and seed butters. They go great on whole wheat or multigrain crackers. Something else that goes great on crackers, canned or pouch tuna. So things like the Star-Kissed pouches or the canned tuna. Again, you want to make sure that it's not super high in salt. You're trying to make better choices for these pantry items, but that's a great little high protein snack on a cracker, okay? Things that you can purchase that are on the fresh side, okay, instead of these non-perishable pantry items. And I would wait to purchase them. Again, hurricane season, we have a lot of warning, okay? So you can plan it out for the most part. I realize that in other emergency situations, you don't always get that kind of notice. But when you are able to, keep in mind that things like apples can last a month or more if stored in a cool, dry area away from other perishable fruits. So if you put apples with bananas, the bananas ripening are actually going to make the apples ripen a little quicker. Okay, so if you store the apples alone, they actually last quite a while. Citrus as well, so oranges and grapefruit, because of the acid content and the thick skins, they can last up to 2 weeks unrefrigerated. Avocados, don't get soft, ripe avocados. You get the super firm, kind of unripe avocados, and they can sit on your counter for up to a week. Same with tomatoes, firm and on the unripe side, and they're good for several days. Cucumbers and summer squash, only a few days, but you get some fresh veggies, okay, and they can sit on the counter. One of our other dietitians shared with me the other day that she does this with cabbage, heads of cabbage. Leading up to the disaster preparedness plan, right, leading up to the hurricane, she would, or if she's just trying to minimize her trips to the grocery store, she would get 2 heads of cabbage, throw them in the fridge, and then cook them towards the end of a 2-week period because they're good in the fridge for almost 2 weeks. And so she would cook them sort of at the end of that 2 weeks, just to minimize how often she had to go to the grocery store for fresh fruits and vegetables. Foods that last, more foods that last. If you have a working stove, if you're able to cook, you have power, or you have a grill. Potatoes and sweet potatoes can last about a month, again, stored in a cool, dark area. Okay, so white potatoes, sweet potatoes, the little fingerlings, it doesn't matter. So they all last for a good month. Again, this would be not in a power loss situation, but in a situation where you just, maybe you don't have access to the grocery store as frequently, or you're trying to cut down the number of trips. Same with winter squash. So things like butternut squash, acorn squash, they will keep for a few months. So you have to cook them, you got to have power, but they last a long time before you cook them. Jerky, I get questions about jerky and whether it's actually healthy or not as a high protein snack. And the answer is yes, jerky can be a healthy snack, but there are some parameters to make it a healthy snack, okay? So jerky is cured. It's a cured meat, and that often creates nitrites. And we know that nitrites are not good for us, okay? So preferably, if you are keeping jerky in the pantry, we're looking for brands that are cured with just salt and vinegar. So a lot of jerky, we're talking about kind of the gas station, not so good for you jerky, is cured with synthetic or chemical compounds that are nitrites. Even the jerky that is cured with celery powder can create nitrites. So you really want it to say that it's cured with just salt and vinegar. Jerky has a tendency to be very high in sodium because of the preservatives, right, to make it shelf stable. So a lot of what I looked at used 500 milligrams or less, or in this case 450 milligrams or less, as a marker to try to qualify it as low sodium. Okay. We also, sometimes jerky is flavored, and so it can have a lot of sugar in it. So we're looking for maybe 5 grams or less. It should be a protein snack, not a sugar snack, okay? And most of the time, when you are meeting these parameters for really healthy jerky, you're also gonna find that it's grass-fed, organic, hormone-free, which also tends to be higher in omega-3s. And so these are just a couple of brands that meet that, okay? It's not all inclusive, but it just gives you a couple of ideas, suggestions. So as we have found in the last few months, we can have events without power loss that still require some disaster preparedness. And just like we saw back in March and April and even May, you can't always prepare for everything. There were a lot of things unavailable that we would never have expected to be unavailable, right? But for the most part, here is a list. Here are some suggestions of things to stock, okay? Frozen fruits and vegetables. We're going to talk more about freezer foods. And I realize that I'm about to tell you to stock your freezer when, in the event of power loss, you're going to be worried about having to throw all those foods away. So my best suggestion, as we're trying to balance these scenarios and being prepared, I always keep my freezer relatively stocked with all the things with what we're about to talk about. And then in the event of a possible power loss type storm, again, we have that notice for hurricane season. So maybe leading up to that week, leading up to a possible storm, you try to use up as much as you can from what's in the freezer, so that if you lose power, you don't have a huge loss of food. that you end up having to throw away. And then after the storm, you can restock the freezer, okay? So that being said, I always have some frozen fruit and frozen vegetables in the freezer. I think right now I've got some spinach, some corn, like the bags of corn kernels, some cauliflower rice, maybe some broccoli florets, and just like little single bags, not massive family size bags, but I have a little bit of variety. I always keep a loaf of bread in the freezer. Preferably, again, we're trying to be as nutritious as possible. Whole wheat, multi-grain bread. You can do wheat tortillas, depending on what your preference is. Bread goes stale in the fridge. It really stores much better in the freezer. And so that's where I like to keep it. And then you just kind of pull out a slice at a time or 2 slices for a sandwich, whatever you need. I try to keep a little extra meat, chicken, and fish in the freezer. Frankly, I do this all the time just so that I don't have to go to the store every single week if I don't need to, if I have everything else. So I always have a couple of packs of chicken breasts in there, some ground turkey, maybe a pork loin, some fish fillets. I try to have a variety in there, okay? In the pantry, and this was not in our non-perishables because this stuff requires cooking, right? So this is, you still need power for these foods. But I always have brown rice, quinoa, dried pasta, and oats for oatmeal in my pantry, okay? I always keep them stocked. They make a good meal with whole grains. Keep some bouillon or stock so that you can cook with it. Otherwise, you're stuck cooking with water. And you can, but you lose a lot of flavor that way. Bouillon comes in a lot of different ways. You can get the dried bouillon cubes that you can dissolve in water. You can get the big 32-ounce cartons of the liquid stock already made and ready to go. I would keep a variety, right? That's what I've been saying the whole time. It's the spice of life. And then these last bullet points I added, given what we've seen over the last few months and what I experienced in my own kitchen, flour disappeared, bread disappeared, flour disappeared, sugar, yeast. You could not find these things. I couldn't even get them on Amazon for a while. So always keep flour, sugar, butter, eggs. You can do a lot with those 4 items. And then your baking powder, baking soda, yeast. Yeast is, the active dry yeast is typically a pantry item. I tend to buy it in a bigger jar and keep that jar in the freezer. It lasts longer. It still works just fine. Okay. And that way you have some options. All right, so I did not say this at the beginning, and I should have. If you have any questions, you can drop them in the Q&A section. There should be a drop down on your screen with a Q&A option. So if there are any questions, now would be the time. Otherwise, that's about all I got for today. And hopefully your pantry and your kitchen are well stocked for a nutritious power loss event. How about that? All right, I do not see any questions. So I am gonna log off. Thank you so much for joining. And hopefully you will be back for our next event. I think we're planning on doing them every other month or so. So watch our Florida Cancer Facebook page for announcements. Thank you so much.